Good afternoon. I was born and bred in Ivanhoe. I was born at my granny's. At the nice little villages, Ivanhoe, like what they calls interdenominational. Has got a church, a Ebenezer Strict Baptist, a Wesleyan Reform, a Bethel, and a little Salvation Army made out of corrugated iron. And when that rains, that don't half rattle. Only, of course, 'tis nice soft water. I'm church myself, St. Mark's, what they calls perpendicular. That was built by the Vikings in the 11th century afore the railway come. There's got some fine old crusaders in it, like these here stone statues where he lays underneath and they puts these here stone statues on the lid so's you recognise yourself. Only I don't reckon nobody'll recognise him, 'cause us have been sharping our sickles and fagging hooks on him ever since I can remember, and he hadn't got no face then. Us gets into church at night and sharps our sickles and fagging hooks on this here old crusader. All over him. I reckon that's the finest bit of sharpening stone in Hertfordshire. Only, of course, nobody don't know that's been handed down like. I had to laugh at our old vicar showing some folks over the church. He says this year old crusader, he says, was defaced by Oliver Cromwell at the time of the Revelation. I had to laugh. He lays there quite comfortable like, with his old woman alongside him. I reckon that's the finest bit of sharpening stone in Hertfordshire. Only his old woman ain't no good. Can't get no edge out of her. He have a little dog lays at his feet, like a little crusading dog what used to follow after him down by the Crimea. Only I reckon that's more like a whippet if you ask me. That stands over again the organ. I like music. I used to sing in the choir, only they reckon my voice was a bit too spiteful. I mind old Charlie Hawkins said to me one time, he said, "You got a belly full of music, Jimmy, but a bad road out." But I had a tidy good education. I could read when I was 18, only, of course, not to understand it. Not like that old Miss Piggott what used to play the organ. I hated the sights of her. I couldn't abide her. They reckon her dad was a big army gentleman left over from the mutinies. But she was very hot on the temperance. I mind she seed my barrow stood outside the Rose and Crown one time. I'd been over to get some bean sticks from by the crab tree, and I stood my barrow outside the Rose and Crown, and she seen it stood there. So I sees her on the Tuesday, and she starts off at me. She says, "I seed your barrow stood outside the Rose and Crown," she says. "That's intemperance," she says. "Look not upon the wine when it is red," she says, "'cause at the last it biteth like a serpent and singeth like a adder." Proverbs 25, 31 and 32. But I said I was never inside the Rose and Crown. I said I never come near, and she says, "I seed your barrow stood outside." She says, "That's intemperance, that's intemperance." So I seed it wasn't no good argufying. I touched me hat and I said good afternoon. About 3 or 4 days afterwards, I left my barrow stood outside her front door all night. That had her. I just been over to old Charlie's funeral. I seen old Nobby at the graveside. He ain't been outside for nigh on 6 year. I says to him, "How old are you, Nobby?" He says, 98. I says, "Soon be your turn, won't it?" And he laughed. "I shan't die," he says, "I knows it." Shouted it at me like that. "I shan't die," he says. I wouldn't be surprised if he don't, too. Well, there was a subject over in Oldbury, lived to be 112. He never died. I went into him one morning, he wasn't there. I never seed the going of him. That was old George Eliot. What was? But he was a wonderful good workman, were Charlie. Turn his hand to anything. Wonderful man with horses. Mr. Buckmaster didn't like to let nobody else handle his boxy if he could help it. He used to give him dandelion leaves. It used to make his coat come up lovely, like he'd been knocked all over with a little hammer. He used to spend his Sundays in the stables along with the horses. He done most of his courting in old Buckmaster's stable. If you wants to see me, he used to say to these girls, you'll have to come up the stables. I said to him one time, I said, do you mind that schoolmistress over at Slapton what give you £0.50 a week to walk out with her? And he said, and he laughed. He had about 120 £0.50 on him at one time, but he married 2 sisters at the finish. Rare one for the girls was Charlie. In fact, we both was, only he was worse. Well, he used to say, I want to scatter my maker's image about a bit afore I be took. And he did too. I mind the new vicar said to me, he said, I can't make it out. He says, all the children in this here village looks alike to me. And I laughed, but he never seemed to follow me, so I give it up. That was the year Mrs. Harvey's apple tree blowed down. Well, I mind when me and old Charlie was helping build the new barn up at the crab tree. We was up on the roof fixing in these here rafters and cross ties to hold 'em in like. And a archaeologist come by what was digging over on the Dibbler. He shouts up at me, he says, you know what you done, he says, and I says, no, sir. He says, you made a triangle, he says. I says, have I? I didn't know. And he says, that's indestructible, he says. If anybody tries to catch you out, he says, don't matter who it is, he says, you just say any 2 sides of a triangle is together greater than the third. That'll have 'em, he said. He reckoned that were unanswerable. He had some students with him, young fellows about 45. I mind when Mr. Buckmaster catched me taking a rabbit out of one of his snares. Red-handed he caught me. I had to go up about it too. The old magistrate says to me, he says, you got anything to say, he says? And I says, yes, sir, I says, any 2 sides of a triangle is together greater than the third. That had him. He couldn't answer. He had to ask the clerk. They had their heads together for about 5 minutes. Then he says, 10 shillings. I reckon they'd have made that £1 if I hadn't knowed that. I told this year old archaeologist when I seen him next time, and he laughed. He says, I see I shall have to learn you all about the square on the Pythagoras, he says. If you knows that, he says, that's half the battle. But he never showed me.
Good afternoon. I just been across to see old Harry Partridge in the cottage hospital. He cut his leg on a bit of old iron, and that turned sceptical. I says to him, how you feeling, Harry? And he says, well, he says, I'm better than what I was, he says, but I ain't as well as what I was afore I was as bad as what I am now. So you can tell he must have been pretty poorly. There's one thing, you see a lot of changes when he comes out, because you've had the proper water fitted in since he's been away. Council water in pipes. But I don't care for it myself. Well, there don't seem to be no strength in it. You can't hardly taste it. You can't even smell it. Give me a drop of my old well water every time. You could smell that all right. That's why they made me fill it in. A fella come across from Luton and took someone it away to be annihilated. That's alive, he says, crawling with them, he says. I says, crawling with what? And he says, bacteriums and microphobes and minute animal organisations. I says, get away, I says, there's only a few tadpoles, I says. We depends on them, I says, to help us out with the meat ration. He had to laugh. Well, he says, that might be all right for bathing in, he says, but it certainly ain't fit to drink. Wow, the idea, bathing. I never had a bath in my life, not as far as I know. I don't want one, neither. That's why I hopes I never has to go into hospital. Lot of young girls are lugging you about and gawking at you. I've been private all my life, and I wants to stay private. I told this fella I never had a bath, and he says, well, however do you get the dirt off then? And I says, when that's thick enough, that falls off, I says, like you do off a tater. Of course, it has to be dry, like. Wow, the idea. My old mother never bathed any of us. She used to rub us all over with bacon fat and then sew us up in flannel for the winter. 11 of us lying on the kitchen table. We was sewed up round about Michaelmas, and we wasn't unsewed till Lady Day. She used to cut 2 armholes in this little bit of flannel and put it on us like a jacket. Then sew us up the belly with red cotton. 11 of us lying on the kitchen table. Then her and my old dad used to do each other. Wow, the idea, bathing. Like when I went across to thin old Miss Piggott's onions out. She says, I reckon you wants a bath. She says, you're filthy, she says. Why, she says, you're dirtier than what old Tommy Fairchild is, she says. So I says, well, I says, I'm 3 years older than what he is, I says, and I gets about more, I says. So she says, she says, a rolling stone gathers no moss. So I says, no, I says, and a sitting hen don't grow no feathers on her belly. That had her. She couldn't answer. She went as red as a beetroot. I thought she was going to explode. Wow, the idea, talking to me like that. I'd thin her onions out for her if I had my way, riding round on that fat little pony of hers like a tom tit on a round of beef. I had my hair cut yesterday. A fella comes across from Dunstable every fortnight and does the whole village, in old Mrs. Wilkinson's scullery. He's got two prices, 8p and 4p, so you can either have it cut or notched. The only difference is when he's notching, he goes faster and he ain't quite so careful. He took half an inch off one of old Tommy Lavender's ears last time he was over. I heard old Tommy holler out, and when I went in, there he was holding his head over the sink, and this here barber chap was down on his hands and knees looking for the bit he chopped off. He found it behind the mangle. They tried to put it on again, but it kept falling off. So in the end, old Tommy took it home with him in a matchbox. He reckons he's going to hang that on his watch chain. I hear old Billy Collett's dead across at Ivanhoe Arston. Last Friday he died. I reckon they'll miss him over there. They don't grow him like old Billy every day. He cut a hole in his gas mask so he could get his pipe through. He used to do all his own cooking, you know, in one of these little Emmanuel saucepans. Old Mrs. Wibden used to go in there every 3 or 4 weeks and give it a wash out for him. Of course, he lived all by himself, you see, after his old gal died. He thought the world of her, you know. He used to worry himself to death 'cause she wasn't married. He was a rare one, was old Billy. They don't grow 'em like him every day. He could spit on a flea. Well, he used to say, why crack 'em when you can drown 'em? And he always had an answer, you know, no matter who he was a-talking to. You couldn't catch him out. I remember when he got a job as a railway porter across at Cheddington, during the war, you know, when they took down all the signs and labels and that off everything, so as we shouldn't know where we was. Well, the first morning he was on duty, he forgot where he was. But he wasn't catched out, you know, wasn't catched out. When his first train steamed in, he just hollered out, here you are, for where you're going, haul you in there for here, get out. I remember when he moved into one of them old cottages down by Wellcroft, a proper old one, you know, with an outdoor sanatorium and that. And that garden wasn't half in a pickle. Well, it hadn't been lived in for nigh on 8 years, you know. There was thistles 5 foot high. But he mastered it. He got that so's you wouldn't have knowed it. You wouldn't have knowed it, I tell you. Taters, cauliflowers, cabbages, lettuces, geraniums. You wouldn't have knowed it, I tell you. And the old vicar come walking by one day and sticks his head over the wall. He says, Willie, he says, it's wonderful what God can do in a garden with a little help, ain't it? And old Willie says, he says, but you should have seen it when he had it to himself. Always had an answer, you know. Not like old Toggie Bygraves across at Pittston. He was supposed to have been dead and buried one time. Old Morty went over and measured him up. He had his coffin nearly finished. He'd only got to polish it and put the handles on, and then old Toggie come round. He lived another 9 years. Old Morty wasn't half wild. He says, how about that coffin, Toggie? And old Toggie says, all right, he says, I'll have it. He says, I dare say that'll come in handy some day, he says. Put me 6 shelves in it, he says, so's we can use that for a cupboard, he says. He had that standing up in his kitchen for 9 years, alongside the fireplace. Well, that'll keep it warm anyhow, he says. I says to him, lucky job you finished growing, ain't it? And he laughed. Of course, he was a wonderful farmer, was old Toggie, you know. He used to say, treat your land same as you treat a baby. Keep its face clean and its bottom dry. But he had very loose lungs. They used to blow about in windy weather. You could hear 'em a-creaking. He used to eat lead shot to hold 'em down, you know, else they reckoned he'd have blowed away. So he used to swallow a mouthful of shot every now and again. That used to hold 'em down all right. I'm a-going to sing to you now. My love, she is a cookie, as sweet as apple pie, and if I cannot marry her, I'll know the reason why. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, I love that gal, I do. She is the darling of my heart, my darling, darling Sue. My darling, 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 darling Sue. She's like a little barrel, her skin is white as milk. Her eyes are grey, her hair is black and smooth as any silk. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, I love that gal, I do. And I know I'll go stark staring mad without my darling Sue. Without my darling, 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 darling Sue. Good afternoon.